Hello everyone, my name is Lowko and welcome back to another StarCraft video. Now what I got for you today is an in-depth look at one of the strategies that Serral, the current world champion of StarCraft 2, likes playing very regularly, in particular in best of 5 and in best of 7 series. Now this game that we're looking at today is part of the grand finals of Homestory Cup. It was played literally like 2 days ago. If you're watching this on the day that the video goes live, it has been played very recently, and I figured it would be great to have a look at this right now because obviously all of these games were played on the new balance patch. Now, the new balance patch, it doesn't really affect all too much as far as this strategy goes, but I do think that this is a strategy that many of us Zerg players can execute on the ladder as well. Alrighty, so here's the thing. Serral is very good when it comes to playing that very defensive playstyle where you just defend, and eventually you overwhelm your opponent. However, if you're playing tournaments, obviously it doesn't make a lot of sense to play that kind of strategy every single game because you become very predictable. So this Roach Ravager timing attack is very good to execute. I would say maybe like half to maybe a third or so of your ladder games as well. And I noticed that Serral does it on the maps where he doesn't really feel as comfortable. So this game, it was played on Dreamcatcher. Now Dreamcatcher has all of these ledges right over here where siege tanks can siege up, and it's pretty difficult to play a long drawn out macro game, in particular in the way that all of the bases are laid out. Usually Zerg is going to be spread rather thin. So on these kind of maps, Serral does like executing this kind of strategy. And I believe actually as part of this series, he did it a second time on Acid Plant, if I'm not mistaken as well, although I believe that was a bit of a faster variant. Regardless, in this game, he decides to open up with a very quick spawning pool. Now, I'm going to pause it for just a little bit to explain the reasoning behind this. Also, I want to quickly introduce his opponent. Even though he's playing under a barcode nickname, this is none other than Innovation. Many call him the most dominant StarCraft 2 player of all time. I mean, he's been playing for... I think he's been playing since like 2011, and he's won tournaments left and right ever since. So he's definitely not a weak opponent. But Innovation in this series already played rather cheesy. So I think that Serral decided that he didn't really want to take any unnecessary risks, and he went straight for that pool first. Now, this is by no means an all-in. Basically, it leads to a very similar mid-game. You can definitely go ahead and make the pool and the gas a little bit earlier and then the expansion a little bit later to get those Zerglings out a little bit faster and to potentially harass the command center on the low ground, or to stop it if your opponent is playing a little bit more aggressively. So you definitely don't have to go for that pool first if you want to execute the style, or you can. But going a hatch gas pool at like 16, 17... is going to be perfectly fine to execute this build with as well. But it does mean that Serral has a couple of Zerglings out that he's going to use to try and harass his opponent for just a little bit. Now, I don't think this is really the most important thing to talk about. Honestly, when you're going for this kind of push, the first 5 minutes or so are going to look very normal. What is important, however, is the couple of scouts that Serral executes very well. So first off, these Zerglings manage to get in. They're going to deal a little bit of damage. They see that there's not really anything super aggressive here coming up. He's going for that very fast third base here as well, very normal, but he notices that everything is great. However, this is the important scout. So this overlord over here is absolutely critical. It is important to figure out if you can hang it right above your opponent's natural, or maybe inside of the main base, to see what kind of structures are being planted down. However, as you may have noticed there, Serral did see that there was a single marine there on the perimeter already, and he decides to send it back towards his high ground. The point at which you want to scout with this overlord is usually around, I would say, 3.5 minutes or so in game time, and you do that every single ZVT. The reason for that, and I actually asked Lambo about this during Homestory Cup, the reason for that is that you want to see at right around the 4-minute and 10 to like 4-minute and 15-second mark whether or not the factory is still producing something. So while this is all going on, right, Serral is just droning up as he normally does. He's got a couple of Zerglings coming up, but as you may have noticed here, there's really nothing all too crazy just yet. He took the third base. He's got a couple queens out, so this is going to be the 5th queen that is just about to be birthed here on that natural hatchery. He's got a couple of Zerglings now coming up as well, just to defend against this kind of aggression. So far, everything is very normal. right? And this is something people can execute every game. However, it is important to scout what happens when you see the factory with this Overlord Scout right around 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Now, in this particular case, SERRAL's actually a little bit late with the Overlord. He probably wanted to get in there like 5 to 10 seconds earlier. Obviously, he's rather occupied with what is going on. And we'll have a look at what is going on here in just a second. I'll backpedal. But there's a couple of important scouts here. So first off, SERRAL sees that the factory is only just now lifting up. And he notices that there's 2 more of these Hellions already coming out as well. That does mean that those are the 7th and the 8th Hellion that are coming out. And that's actually really important, because in some situations, as you may have noticed right here, there's 6 across the map and then 2 over here. In some situations, Terrans will actually pull that factory off of the reactor at like 6 Hellions, and then they will transition towards Marines, or maybe that Banshee play a little bit quicker. In this case, though, it's going to be 7 and 8. And he also knows that it's not going to be more Hellions, so it's very unlikely that Terran is going to transition into mech, and it's much more likely at this point that Terran is going to transition towards a standard bio-based army. So usually, if you see your opponent pulling the factory off after the 6 or the 8 Hellions, it does mean that they're going to be transitioning towards bio. So that's exactly what SERRAL scouts right here. And secondly, he also sees that the command center comes up at a normal timing. So right around the 4 minute and 15 second mark, you want to see if the factory is producing that 7 and 8 Hellion, or if they're already out. And you also want to have a look at whether or not the command center is being built. Now in this case, it's being built at the front. He could have scouted this with a Zergling, but obviously sometimes you will see Terran players making it over here or making it over here. I mean, that's very unlikely, but you want to make sure that you have a look at the very least at whether or not your opponent is trying to get that 3rd command center out. And once again, this simply confirms one thing for SERRAL, and that is that his opponent is playing a normal, right? And with normal right now in Terran versus Zerg, it's going to be that bio siege tank based army, or that bio Widowmine based army. All right. So this Overlord Scout, 3 minutes and 30 seconds to like 4 minutes or so. That's when you want to send it in. You want to make sure you have a look at the timing of these 2 structures. And this is kind of giving SERRAL the go-ahead to go for this kind of build. Alrighty. So Stimpack gets started up here. Also, by the way, seeing that command center timing here is really important, because it tells SERRAL that it's not going to be like an additional 2 barracks here. So first the command center and then 1 barracks, and I think there's going to be a second one here being added on as soon as Inno has the money. There we go. Another one of those barracks does get built. So this is a perfect Overlord Scout. It sees everything. It shows that everything is normal. Now, while this is going on, the Hellions, now joined with the 7 and the 8 one, are trying to be a little bit of a nuisance. So their main goal, obviously, is to try and roast drones. It's really, really important that you send the queens and whatnot in the proper direction, fend against this kind of aggression. So you see right here, SERRAL is indeed splitting up his links for a little while. But his main goal right now, and actually I think, yeah, if I'm not mistaken, SERRAL actually is forced to deal with the Hellions inside of the main base. But you can see he made a lot of links to try and deal with that. But the main goal for Zerg in this kind of scenario right now, when you want to go for that Roach Ravager based push, is to build up to 66 drones. Okay, 66 drones is when you have 16 in or on minerals right here in the natural, the main, as well as at the 3rd base. Or I guess this is the main, the natural, and then the 3rd base, right? Plus, on top of that, you will be able to mine from 6 gases. So notice right here, as soon as SERRAL deflects the Hellion aggression, he immediately puts down all of the extractors. Well, I guess he's delaying the 6-1 for just a little while, but as soon as the Hellions are gone, and he knows that it won't be scouted, he puts down a whole bunch of additional gas. On top of that, the Lair has been started. He goes double Evo, as well as that Roach Warren, which is going to be extremely difficult to scout right now for Innovation, because if Inno wants to scout this, he's going to have to commit a scan to his opponent's main or natural base, and obviously it's always a bit of a gamble, right? If you're Terran and you scan the main, you might not necessarily see anything. If you scan a natural, you might not necessarily see anything either. But right now, it's a race for SERRAL to go up to 66 drones. As soon as those Evo chambers finished, which once again he put down right around the time that the hatchery got started as well, he goes for +1 missile and +1 armor. And then right when the Roach Warren finishes, which he started up shortly after those 3 structures, he should be able to start up Glio Reconstitution as well. And as you may have noticed here, these upgrades will all finish right around the same time. And that's the really important part. So when Serral arrives at this point, he does one more cheeky move that I do want to emphasize, but I don't think you necessarily want to do this every single game you play, unless you play at like a super high level yourself too. But Serral does one more really cheeky move that I think is really cool. He goes for the 4th base, and soon he even transfers from drones from the 3rd over towards the 4th base. And the reason for that is that Serral, he's aware of the fact that Innovation is likely to scout the 4th base to see whether or not this kind of push is coming, and he's showing his opponent some eco over here. That's like a next level, like, you know, if we're talking about different kind of strategies and different kinds of skill levels, that's like a next level strategy to make. But regardless, after defending the aggression, he goes 66 drones. He goes Lair, double Evo, and Roach Warren very quickly. And then right when he arrives at 66, 67-ish workers, he goes for Overlords. And from here on out, Serral really only produces non-stop units. So once again, he got 6 gases and full saturation on 3 bases, and while he does have that 4th hatchery coming up, I've got a feeling that is mostly just to try and throw Innovation off, just because Innovation probably looks at this and thinks it's going to be much more standard macro. Alright, so from here on out, all we will really see is just a lot of unit production, Overlords and units. Now, Serral is running around here with a couple of the leftover Zerglings, mostly trying to see if he can poke in and maybe deal a little bit of damage. Nothing all too crazy happening here, but this is the cute move out, and I love this one, okay? So, Innovation is making a bit of a move right now across the map. Now, notice there's just non-stop units coming up. Serral, being an absolute monster at scouting, is really good at figuring out where this kind of stuff is at, right? But the nice thing that I really like about this kind of build is that it's not only really good offensively, but it also holds these kind of timings. So early on, Serral made like 20 or so Zerglings to deal with the initial Hellions. Then with this push, he's got himself the Roaches as well as the Ravagers out to deal with the Marine aggression. Now, a couple of drones do end up falling. He's also using those Queens that were dedicated to creep spread to try and deal damage to this, raining the Biles on top of those siege tanks, and he shuts this one down. So a lot of builds in SC2 are kind of like all-in-y in the sense that they require you to take a huge amount of risk. With this kind of style, Serral's going to be safe against pretty much everything. If he would have scouted, for example, that it was going to be cloaked Banshee play when he ran in the Overlord, or I guess he flew in the Overlord, he would be able to obviously defend against that as well. And all things considered, it just allows you to figure out precisely what's going on, and you can respond to it all accordingly. So once again, a couple Zerglings to defend against the initial aggression, then a non-stop Roach Ravager after getting up to 66 drones and after starting up these upgrades. Now, ideally, and I think this is one of the minor mistakes that Serral did make in this game, ideally you push right when this finishes, right? However, you know, being a very good player as well, he figures out that his opponent likely is going to want to do a push across the map. So right when Serral finishes up 1-1 and Roach speed, this is when you want to ideally push. But in this particular case, you know, Inno is doing a bit of a push here towards this side of the map as well. Plus, he knocked down the rocks over here to try and delay Zerg for a little while. So Serral is a little delayed. In this case, though, it doesn't matter. He's just going to continue making more and more Roaches here, too. Now, this is the cheeky move that I just wanted to point out, okay? So notice how Serral lost a couple drones over here. He had the 4th base, which has now been scouted by Innovation, and he shows that he's got a bunch of drones over here. Now notice, he could have sent those drones towards the 3rd instead. However, if this would have happened, Inno would have arrived at this base, only to see that there was no mining going on there whatsoever. Instead, right now Innovation finds out that indeed there is some mining going on over here. Serral does pull some of the drones away from this area as well, but this is a really cheeky move that I think is a very high-level decision to transfer some of the drones towards the 4th and to show some mining over there. Regardless, from here on out, Serral's just going to make non-stop units, and while he's defending this area over here with a handful of dedicated Roaches, so he's got some Queens over here, well, pretty much all of his Queens right now. He even transferred one of the Spores from, I think, the 3rd base towards the main to try and deny these kind of drops even harder. But while this is all going on, he's pushing with his main army as well, and he's morphing in Ravagers with however much gas he's got left over. So some people ask, like, Lowko, how do you decide what kind of, like, ratio to Roaches and Ravagers do you want? Well, in this case, you really just want to have as many Ravagers as possible. Because you're mining off of 6 gas anyway, you should be able to afford quite a few. But you can delay +2/+2 2 until this push is done. And if you haven't won the game yet, that's when you can try and go for the 2-2. But in this case, Serral tries to just simply max out on a lot of roaches. He has been delayed since he couldn't right push at +1/+1 and then roach speed. He's just simply making non-stop army. And you can see Serral in this case maxes out. Or I guess he's gonna push right before he maxes out. But regardless, he maxes out at 194 supply, roughly 8.5 minutes into the game. Now I think that's a really important benchmark, okay? 8.5 minutes into the game is a really important benchmark to try and keep in mind. So what we'll do after this one is I'm gonna try and jump into a game against no one. And I'm gonna try and see if I can execute this push myself too, to see if I can hit that 8.5 minute timing. Regardless, here's that big push. I guess we can speed it, or we can slow it down just a little bit. We do want to be on that faster movement speed, but here we go. He's simply gonna push up with as much as he can, biles down all of the tanks with about 3 corrosive biles each, and he's trying to rain some biles here on some of these medevacs too, after the siege tanks are gone. Now notice he's not playing it too risky. He is playing rather careful. He doesn't know if there's another siege tank sitting up on that high ground. There's no reason to play too aggressive here. Instead, just slowly push up and reinforce with more and more army. So still, Serral has not been producing +2/+2. He still has not been jumping into, like the main base of the Terran here. Is just slowly, methodically reinforcing this with more and more. And even if this would be shut down somehow, some way, right? Serral still has 4 bases here. He still has +2/+2 coming up, and he still has a lot of economy and technology to back this up with as well. So this is a really cool push that I think is relatively straightforward to execute, that a lot of people should be able to execute as well, as long as your macro is on point, and you're very likely to win a whole lot of games with it as well. Alright, so here's the plan. I've decided to create a lobby. I've only added myself. There is no AI, there is no opponent, and we're just simply gonna start it just as it is. I think this is actually really important because seeing a strategy for the first time and then immediately executing it on the ladder is very difficult. You don't really want to do that because it means that you have to dedicate a lot of your brain power, so to say, to executing a strategy, and I don't think that's necessarily worth it, right? It makes it just much more difficult to go for this kind of strategy if you have to think about the build order too much. So instead, just simply executing it in a custom game against no one, or maybe against a friend, or maybe against an AI, it should give you a much better starting point. So once again, my goal here is to max out right around the 8.5 minute mark while playing safe against pretty much everything. Now, I think I should be able to max out a little bit sooner because obviously in this game, there's not actually anyone here bothering me, which, makes it much easier. I mean, I'm not going to lose any units here because there's no one to kill my units. But regardless, let's play a more, I would say, clean version of this build, just because we're not going up against one of the greatest Terran players of all time. So let's go for the hatchery on the low ground. Once again, you can go for the pool first if you like to. I personally do prefer playing that hatchery first. It's just a little bit easier and a little bit smoother as far as like the creep spread and whatnot go. And maybe I'm gonna make some minor mistakes here as well. Maybe you can catch up on those. If you do see me making any changes to this strategy that Serral was clearly doing differently, let me know down below in the comment section. But I think overall we should be in a really normal game. So I'm gonna rally more and more drones right here to that gas right now as well. And usually what is advised in Zerg vs Terran is to try and send a drone towards the third base a little bit sooner. Once you realize that your opponent has got that natural taken, you can go ahead and take the third base as well. So here we go. Already, I've got this drone coming up. I'm gonna rally that right over here. And the idea behind that is that that drone arrives on the third base before the Reaper can intercept it on its route there. So it's a nice little way of playing rather safe. Alrighty, so spawning pool is just about to finish. I probably wanted to make an overlord actually a little bit sooner, but it's all fine. We can start up one queen over here, one queen over there, and I'm gonna go ahead and pull 1 or 2 drones out of gas, and we'll start up the zergling speed as well as 2 sets of zerglings. Now notice, I've got 1 drone over here. We can check, hey, is there a natural over here? Great, there might be. Let's go ahead and send that overlord back, and we'll send it back in just about a minute or so from now. And then while this is all going on, right, usually there's going to be a little bit of Reaper shenanigans in the natural right now. We can go ahead and take the third base without much of a hassle. This is when you go back to that drone production, right? This is when you go back to that drone production, you try and play as safe as possible. And we can send that queen towards the natural and make another one inside of the main base as well. So I think Serral went up to like 5-6 queens, right? That's a pretty important thing to note. Sometimes, by the way, players will hand that or hang that second overlord over at the third base instead, or maybe a little bit closer by. But regardless, we're just trying to play it as similar as we can right now. I've got another overlord coming up here as well. We do have a couple of zerglings. At this point in the game, we could only really be up against like 2 Hellions or so, which I think is going to be fine in this regard. I did make an overlord, right? There it is. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and lay down one tumor over here. And remember, we want to scout right onto this high ground at like 3.5 to 4 minutes or so is when we want to send that overlord in. It does have a little bit of a flight. On some maps, you might be able to send it even later. But let's go ahead and send it that overlord. And this is also, right when zergling speed finishes, a good moment to start adding on more zerglings. So notice I've got a pretty good selection of drones here already. I'm going to continue making another overlord here as well. And if I can, I would like to start up another queen over in the main as well as in the natural. So I'm going to hit the injects over here. And I'm going to once again pull the queens away right now because these are going to be dedicated to defense. So at this point, we can sort of check out over here what's going on. Now, if there's a marine, you probably want to delay it a little bit. But remember, at this point, we really want to be able to see roughly what's going on top of that high ground. Once again, we're expecting either the 7 and the 8 Hellion to come up, either a starport with a tech lab on it, so we know when we need to put down those spore crawlers. Usually around 4 minutes and 30 seconds is a good timing for that if you're going up against Cloak Banshee. And this is also sort of confirming to us when it is okay to transition towards that much more Lair-focused gameplay, right? So at this point, I'm mostly just sitting back, and I think that since I'm not really going up against any kind of aggression, we can probably pretend that there is some. But I know that I'm going to be safe against pretty much everything that my opponent throws at me. But let's say there's some spores needed in this particular case. I think that is a good point to take them as well. All right. So say we've defended against everything right now, right? We continue hitting those injects over there. Slight little mistake there by me, as you may have already noticed, but that's okay. This is the point at which we can start transitioning towards that lair. We want to go double evolution chamber immediately. We want to go more and more gases here as well. Plus, we want to take the Roach Ward. As soon as I can, I want to put down some more drones over in the main base too. So I'm only just now really going to start messing with that. I'm going to send a couple more drones towards the natural. And all other drones right now are going to be sent over towards the third base instead. And I'm pretty sure if I did my math correctly, I should be alright here as far as the saturation goes. There's another queen coming out. That means we have more and more defense available and we can start spreading as much creep as we possibly can. So let's go ahead and start up the +1 carapace here too. Slight little delay there for me. Nothing all too great, but nothing all too terrible either. And ideally, we want to continue making as many of those creep tumors as we can with those 2 queens. Maybe you want to save a little bit of energy just for transfuse, but ideally we go up to 66 drones before we really commit to anything. Now, if you hover over in the top right corner, you can see how many workers you have available. So right now, you may have noticed I've got 66. Let's go ahead and saturate those gases here as well. I'm gonna make one more drone, and I guess we can go ahead and set up a drone towards that 4th base here too. So let's go ahead and start up a 4th hatchery. Once again, I'm pretty sure that's mostly just a fake, but it does look cool if you want to grab one here yourself as well. Phone, I'm busy. Can't believe it. All right, so here's where we get started with a lot of that roach production. You want to make overlords and you want to make roaches. Now remember, if your opponent has been doing nothing up to this point, you might want to delay that 4th for a little while and instead just focus on unit production, because if your opponent has been sitting back and he hasn't pushed with any Liberators, no Banshees, no Hellions, none of that, right? If they have been doing absolutely nothing, there's likely going to be a stronger push coming up. But if your opponent has been playing normal up to this point, I think it is expected that you can likely execute this kind of push right here too. And, you know, just make the roaches at the timing that Serral did as well. All right. So notice my units are out. Roach speed is done. +1/+1 will shortly be finishing up as well. 4th base is coming up. We've been putting down a lot of nice creep. And let's go ahead and send in our units. So we have 2 ways of engaging this. Either we fight them right around right now, with a lot more reinforcements coming up, with +1/+1 finishing right at this point, right? +1/+1 is done. We can push right at this moment if you would like to, which I think is a great thing, but if your opponent is being a nuisance, or maybe the rocks were down or whatever, and you can't hit this timing, another good follow back or follow-up is to try and max out and then push. So notice in that previous game, I actually meant to grab the tumor there, but notice in that previous game, Serral maxed out right around 8 minutes, 30 seconds. That's mostly due to the fact that he had to like remake Zerglings, and he obviously was messed with already. We can transfer some drones here from the main as well towards that fourth, which may actually be another secondary purpose of it. But regardless, we want to simply just make as many units as possible and see how quickly we can max out. So in this case, if you look at the timer, right above the minimap, I should be able to max out right here at about 8 minutes and 5 seconds, 8 minutes and 10 seconds. Now, I think that is something that with a little bit of practice, most people should be able to execute, right? And maybe it will take you not the first game, maybe it will take you a dozen games, maybe it will take you 50 games, but I genuinely do think that this is an excellent way of practicing macro. So, once again, you do want to push, you don't want to just sit back on Roach Ravager, because transitioning towards a late game with just purely Roach Ravager is bad. Make sure to set up your rapid fire as well so you can buy all the units down wherever they are. And try and just simply overwhelm your opponent with sheer numbers. So I think there we have it. If you have any questions, let me know down below in the comment section of this video. I will hang out there myself too, and I will try and answer as many questions as I can. Also, if you see someone asking questions and you know the answer, feel free to let them know too. Now, special shout out to the Patreon supporters. A lot of the patrons mentioned rather, that they would like to see more guides and more tutorial focused content as well. So I figured, you know what? I think it is about time to do a little bit more of that. And I think right now in SC2 is the perfect time for exactly that. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button, but also check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/LowkoTV. But for now, guys, I want to thank you for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile alright. And I will see you once again in the next one.